looking for high-performance data storage that's easy to use yet secure enough for the Department of Defense? Look no further. Racktop Systems gives business software-defined data storage complete with embedded compliance, security, and data encryption. Don't let cyber threats, regulatory demands, or the complexity and growth of your data overwhelm your business. Racktop's high-performance data management platform gives you the tools you need to address the most demanding data challenges. Think beyond storage. To learn more, visit racktopsystems.com. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/ESW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter. The greatest threat to businesses today isn't the outsider trying to get in. It's the people you trust, the ones who already have the keys. Your employees, your contractors, and privileged users. 60% of online attacks are carried out by insiders. To stop these insider threats, you need to see what users are doing before an incident occurs. Observit combats insider threats by detecting risk activity, investigating in minutes, effectively responding, and stopping data lost. Give it a test drive at observit.com/securityweekly. Skeleton keys, golden tickets, forged packs, DC Sync, DC Shadow. The Active Directory attack surface is expanding faster than admins can keep up with. Securing your environment begins with implementing least privilege administrative models, but does not end there. Many organizations send Active Directory syslog events to a SIM platform. However, logs are noisy, of limited scope, and are time-consuming to review and act upon. Active Directory is secure when it's clean, understood, configured properly, monitored closely, and controlled tightly. StealthBits technologies provide solutions that monitor, secure, and detect the latest threats against Active Directory. Visit them today at stealthbits.com to learn more. IT Pro TV, binge-worthy learning for IT teams. Why is it binge-worthy? It's learning presented in an engaging and entertaining talk show format that beats voice-over PowerPoint snooze fests. Watch over 3,300 hours of content in their on-demand library, on your desktop, on the go, or in the comfort of your own living room. IT Pro TV is IT training you and your team actually want to watch, which means a better return on your learning investment. Get started with IT Pro TV for teams by visiting itpro.tv/securityweekly and start a 7-day free trial and get 30% off standard or premium IT Pro TV memberships using the code SECWeekly30. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. This is the Enterprise Security News. I am still here with Ron Gula from Gula Tech Adventures, and we're going to dig into the news. Ron, what was the product when we were at Tenable that did the visualization?
At the Tenable one?
Yeah.
It was just the 3D tool. We actually hired a video game programmer, and we could make a 3D network. It was a 2D network, but then we could project intrusion detection events, vulnerabilities. It looked like Tron, in many of the days, but you could really do a lot of really cool things with it. And we had some customers use it. They just loved using it, like on SOC tours.
Yeah.
It's great.
I thought it was awesome. I feel like Tenable is a trendsetter now, because when you look at a lot of the security analytics companies today, like ExtraHop is in the news, it's very much I look at the screenshots and I'm like, that looks like 3D tool. So I think visualization has become a huge part of the security analytics category.
Yeah, if you want to talk about ExtraHop, visualization is a really interesting thing. And, of course, back in the day, if you're going to put 5,000, 10,000 points on the screen at one point, you've got to use, video game technology, 3D on a Windows computer. But now the technology has gone forward where you can actually put a lot of that in a web browser, and have some really good feedback and some really good user interface. Graphis is a company, an orchestration company that is doing a lot with that as well.
Do you find SOC teams really benefit from this, or is it like you said, kind of like you're on tour, you're giving a presentation to management, you want some cool visualizations?
I've probably been to about maybe 15, 20 SOCs last year or two. I don't think I've ever seen a 2D or 3D graphical interface anywhere there. Where they are is like, if you're drilling down in your carbon black kind of analyst, and there's an event that pops up, you'll see the flow tree maybe of how these events happened or who talks to that. But that's just for reference. It's not for what I consider the deep analytics. Companies like UpLevel, companies like that can visualize that kind of stuff, which is pretty good. But I just don't see people sitting in there and looking at these trees trying to find the one grain of sand.
In the news as well, ServiceNow has introduced a virtual agent, and I was like, "What is that?" And this is the trend that I've seen where, you're collecting a whole bunch of security data or any kind of data related to IT, and the way that you interact with that is through like those AI bots that pop up on vendors' websites, and that's how you're interacting with the technology to get information from it. A lot of them have Slack integration. Ron, what do you think about some of these more interesting and innovative ways to get and ask questions of your various solutions?
So it's really a play to get less experienced people, to become more experienced. I've been pitched a lot of AI companies, and they said, hey, look, take a look at this data, take a look at the alerts, and you'll get conclusions like, wow, a lot of these web attacks are on port 80. And you're like, well, that's kind of an obvious thing, but to a person who's not a forensics expert or has done any time with network, that's brand new stuff. And I think when you look at that being applied to the medical profession, tax professions, it's a way to get less skilled people up. It's also really convenient. When Tanium came out and they had the natural language sort of way to connect in, and how many Windows computers do I have?
Right.
That's been, I think Endgame's doing that now. Yep. So ServiceNow is doing that. That type of, I think, allows you to do things audially. So that what we're doing with Alexa, it enables that kind of stuff, and it just allows you to do things while you're doing other. It's another multitasker. Which I think is amazing. Even ThreatCare, they've got a product called Violet, red team, blue team type of thing, where you can ask it questions like that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. NetSparker has been playing a lot more, and they're a sponsor of our network here. They've been playing a lot more in the DevOps space, and they've got a plugin that integrates with Bamboo, which is a source code repository system, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that's really cool when we take the web application scanner, right? And I think the interesting areas are when we're linking it back to source code repositories so that it can say, create a ticket or identify a vulnerability and associate it with a project or a branch of code, or even integrate with your static analysis tool as well to say, hey, I found this vulnerability, and oh, by the way, when you go look in your static analysis tool, look for this, and have some communications. They're one of the vendors for me that have really been on the forefront of integrating into that DevOps process.
Yeah, there's a fine line between web app scanning, APIs from microservices that might be, web enabled, and actual doing source code analysis, right? A lot of times you're talking about going from source code directly into production, right? The node that's in source code is the node, JS that's running the microservices app. So, how much can you do with black box testing? How much can you do with source code analysis? How much can you do with actually monitoring your container environment, kind of, maybe in that case? Those are all things that people need to do as they think about moving away from traditional, LAMP, PHP, Java apps to this modern, DevOps, SecDevOps type of producing of applications.
Yeah, Keith Lillard, host of our Application Security Weekly show, he hates the term DevSecOps. Yeah, it's like an ongoing thing on the show. Make sure every show he gets it in that's not a thing. That if you do DevOps correctly, security is just built in.
So the funny thing there, I have yet to really meet a lot of people who've said, "Oh, we've just spent $4 or $5 million over the last 5-6 years building this app." And maybe it's a medical healthcare app, maybe it's an airplane, kind of app. They're not basically saying, oh, what we're going to do now? We're going to completely rewrite it with containers and go all in with microservices and do things fast. A lot of people are still saying, look, we don't have the developers, we don't have the tools to do this. We're sort of living on this in our VMware enabled data center for maybe the next 4, 5, 6 years. Yeah. They're not running out and doing that yet. So I'm interested in solutions where we can sort of breathe life into that legacy market. We're not even talking about Java and open source. We're talking about like .NET, legacy apps that connect to, DB2, Microsoft SQL things.
Yeah, and so I gave a presentation recently at Source Boston about Docker security and the things that I learned. I took one of our internal apps and I put it inside of Docker and then started building a DevOps process around it. And our application's small, right? I mean, it started out as a script that helped us publish shows and is growing, but the amount of work that was involved in just me even taking this small Python Flask-based application and putting it inside of Docker was enormous. I mean, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of trial and error. It was a lot of retraining developers to think differently about their whole development process. So I agree, Ron. Vendors that can come into the market today and make that process easier for organizations, I think are going to do really well. So there's an investment tip for you. How about that?
We have invested in a company in that space, but I'll go into that another day.
Okay, awesome. So I find it interesting. We talked about user behavior analytics. Gurucul was one of those companies we actually covered when we first started Enterprise Security Weekly. It was really heavy in that behavior analytics. I think they're starting to make some pivots, as others are in this space, and monitoring fraud, essentially, which I think is a good pivot for a company like Gurucul, right? I think UBA has been swallowed up by SIM companies and largely become a feature. And Gurucul is one of those players that are trying to pivot, and I give them all the credit in the world. Like, if you can make that pivot and make it happen and make your technology solve a slightly different problem for maybe a slightly different audience, fraud prevention, I think, is a logical pivot for some of these companies.
And it's when you get into fraud prevention, though, we've all heard about the here's an email to trick the CEO and the CFO to wiring money to wherever, Bank of Missouri, Nigeria, whatever the thing. And those are very serious and real problems. These fraud solutions sometimes sit on top of your financial systems, your NetSuites of the world, and they will flag, hey, look, this is an anomalous kind of transaction. But then you get into fraud analysis where it's more of there's a lot of wires. So imagine that you're your Walmart, your Home Depot, and you're looking at your online purchases and your vendor supply, and you see you see some anomalies in that. So there's a lot of different ways to do fraud analytics, but it turns out a lot of the algorithms are the same as in user behavior analytics. You're basically you're classifying events that happens. Instead of logins and accessing files and writing files and doing network connections, you're classifying things like can this entity transfer money to this entity? What's normal? Is there a frequency analysis of that? Perhaps it's even more, relevant when you think about beaconing, out. Sure. If I'm wiring payroll every month, I get a lot of, those things like that, every month, every 2 weeks. But maybe a bonus is like once a year or once a quarter if I'm in sales or something like that. So maybe something outside of that pattern could be embezzling funds, could be, something that's not supposed to happen.
That's what I like about fraud prevention, is that it's a much smaller set of circumstances that you have to deal with other than looking at all of your IT operations. There's just so many variables. But when you look at transactions, I think it's easier to identify anomalies.
Yeah. And when you get to a large scale, fraud prevention is all about, your customers not duping you, right? The Social Security Administration has a very large fraud prevention department. Citibank, they've got a lot of people who work tirelessly to make sure that people aren't just kind of creating fake accounts, and unless you're Wells Fargo, right? And putting money out there.
Well, that reminded me. There was a recent change in the U.S. government about how we deal with the cyber. So there was a cyber position that was eliminated, and how does that impact our industry today, Ron?
So the White House has always had a cyber czar, as it's been called. Howard Schmidt's had the position. Amit Yaran, the gentleman who took over for me at Tenable, kind of had it for a while. Sometimes OPM had it from like a budget point of view. But very recently, with the addition of John Bolton coming into the White House, they kind of eliminated this position, and the gentleman's going back to the National Security Agency. And I look at this kind of two ways. So one, I kind of think if Donald Trump had said, "Hey, we're all in on cyber, and here's our cyber person," you'd see all of his enemies basically talk, "Oh my God, the government's going to be coming down on our privacy. We're going to be privatizing the 5G network, hacking into the eye." So some of this is just Trump can do no wrong. But then the other thing is this: anytime I go to a meeting in DC, if I meet with a committee from the Congress, if I meet with anybody who's left the government recently, and they were a cyber person. I mean, it's the Washington DC District of Cyber. I mean, there's so much cyber stuff going on down there. I'm not so sure what this person was coordinating, because there's a lot of stuff to coordinate on the intelligence side, on the DoD side. That's not like the White House is in charge of cyber policy for you and me. They're in charge of, the different agencies, the different Department of Commerce, Department of Defense, and they get to control policy for that. And there have been a lot of companies, people working at that level that are there. I'm not necessarily sure it's a good thing or a bad thing. I think most people who are talking about it are either overemphasizing the importance of cyber, or they just don't like Donald Trump.
Could it be, Ron, and here you describe that situation, that the various departments within the government have identified cyber as a priority and have implemented their own processes such that this position doesn't really need to be there, because now it's basically spread amongst different positions in all of the different branches of the government?
Yeah, when you look at CERT, when you look at OMB, and not from the, everybody talks about OMB as, hey, these guys got hacked and they lost all of our data, but they actually audit all of the government agencies against the NIST cybersecurity framework, and they publish the results, right? So it's not like there's more to put out there. I like to talk about things like the Department of State is proposing. Well, some of the committees they're actually proposing legislation that we need a cyber ambassador. Like, there's more coordination work to do internationally from the Department of State level than at the White House level when it comes to net neutrality, GDPR, all that kind of stuff. So it's not like that's not being coordinated out of those places already. I always felt, and I don't want to go too far, but I always felt the people who had this position, they felt it was not a position of power. They weren't in charge of cyber, right? Nobody at the White House could call DoD and say change this or change that, right? That was something else. And so I think this position is a really interesting position to talk about.
I want to transition, Ron. When I was working at Tenable, one of the themes that was present in security was the concept. It started out as BYOD, right? That was really big. Then I think it kind of transitioned into shadow IT in general. Where do we stand today? I feel like that not a lot of people are talking about that issue, but I don't think it's a problem we've solved either.
Yeah, I think what happens is if you go to a mature organization, they've got their act together. They might not call it the NIST cybersecurity framework, but they've got situational awareness. And if you start over with the first part of the NIST cybersecurity framework, what are my assets? They're going to tell you what their cloud assets are, what their endpoint assets are. They're going to know who's authorized, not authorized. And they're going to have a schema to talk about that in terms of organizations that they may have acquired, different organizations of prioritization. And then you sort of leave that mature type of organization, and maybe you get down to somebody who hasn't invested in these processes. And you'll see, endpoints that are unmanaged. It's not even BYOD. It's hey, there's a Windows 2008 server out there and it hasn't been patched in 2 years. That's an example. If in that kind of environment, it's just as likely that you and I are walking in with our laptops and maybe buying a desktop and putting things there. It's everybody's got a horror story of what goes out there. And what I like is, Tenable really pioneered this. We could discover everything on your network with scanning and sniffing and logging. But this has become a base feature of almost every new product that's out there, whether it's a SCADA ICS monitoring product, a data center monitoring product, or you're just traditional network security monitoring. Hey, we're going to identify all your assets, we're going to baseline them, and then we're going to monitor them going forward. That's awesome. That's a good thing to help this problem.
Yeah, I think the other thing that changed for a lot of organizations too is the movement to cloud and SaaS has kind of almost downplayed the risk from a lot of these devices, right? Like if you can manage your data in the cloud or with this provider, then the device I use is almost kind of irrelevant, right? And there are some proposals.
The device you use, it's irrelevant, but it's also very relevant, right? Because if you change your device and you're logging on to O365, they're going to know that you've got a new device.
Correct.
And as an admin, I'll be like, hey, why is Paul Asadorian logging in from Singapore when I know he's on the East Coast? But at the same time, why is Paul logging on with an Android when I know he's an Apple guy? Or Are you an Apple guy?
No, I'm Android, actually.
Oh yeah, so strike that reverse.
I'm Android and Linux, actually. And we use a lot of Chromebooks here, right? And Google's Cloud. But I think we also have some controls, and I know Duo was working with Google and implementing their model where you can basically say, what's your security level of the device that you're using to access this data? If it's not up to spec, then go get it up to spec.
And this is really interesting, because if you think about, you've got applications in the data center, and then you've got applications in the cloud, not necessarily SaaS, but maybe you're moving like your Exchange to literally running on a Windows VM at Amazon. People do that, believe it or not. They're not all on O365. And you think about the traditional way we get to that and authenticate to that. You have a VPN, you have a NAC, you have a firewall, you have antivirus. A lot of that goes away when you go to the cloud and you start buying those services as a SaaS service. You start looking at, Zscaler. You start thinking about, how do I take my old antiquated sort of VPN traffic and how do I get that as a service? And then, by the way, many of those things will just do the profiling of the endpoint. So do you even need a NAC anymore in that kind of use case? Right. So that's a very interesting trend that I'm watching pretty closely, because I've invested in a number of companies that facilitate that.
Rounding out the news, Red Hat will integrate CoreOS with OpenShift. OpenShift, of course, their container platform. Now they've incorporated CoreOS. I think could be a potentially great move for Red Hat. Although it's interesting, I was talking with Matt Alderman and sharing our viewpoints on this space. What is Red Hat going to do? Right? Are they going to be the next Docker? Are they going to ride alongside Docker? Are they going to provide security? Are they not going to provide security? Like, where do they fit in this market? I think they have the opportunity to be a great platform. Of course, they don't have a cloud like Amazon does, or not even close. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
I'm still bullish on the fact that people are going to run their own data centers and try to run their own clouds. So when you look at services you can get from Red Hat and VMware and Citrix, and even companies that add security just on those things, I think that's going to be a big market for a long time. When you look at dollar spend on cloud versus data center, it skews like 60-40. I've seen people talk about, but they don't realize that the dollars you're spending on the data center go a lot further than the dollars you're spending on your cloud providers. So we'll see how this plays out.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too along those lines. Like, when you move to a containerized environment, you almost you can use on-premise stuff more easily when it's smaller containers rather than pushing around VMs. So I think it's sort of balancing out that cloud versus on-prem thing, where people are like, well, now that I'm moving to containers, I can build my own on-prem solution, and I don't really need to, Amazon's cloud for a lot of the applications anyway.
Yeah, it's definitely if you're thinking about controlling costs, and it's a religious thing. I've seen companies, they change overnight. Just nope, 100% SaaS, 100% cloud. We're not going to do any IT infrastructure. On the other hand, people who are looking at GDPR, people who are looking at they need to have cloud providers that are going to allow them to expand and do and have the type of audit and visibility into the data and workloads that they're doing. A lot of them are looking at Azure because that's where the email is. And they're saying, okay, great. I love Amazon. I love Google. But, all my most precious data is in email, and Microsoft has it. So why not put it at Azure? And, that sort of thing. I'm starting to see that kind of trend moving over.
The last couple of stories here speak to privileged identity management, identity and access management, which is just, I mean, I could spend a lot more time than I already do just tracking this space. We've got announcements from Thycotic that IBM Security is going to OEM their technology, and SailPoint has an announcement, and there was a partner. There was another story here about a partnership, I think, between SailPoint and maybe Centrify. What's your assessment of this market run? Because it's very fast moving today.
Yeah, so privileged account management and, believe it or not, zero trust networking are all part of the same spectrum. No James Bond references here. But, so if I'm an authorized person on the network, I want to connect to my applications and do the job that I want to do. Now, if I'm an admin, maybe I'm an O365 admin who has certain privileges. Maybe I can provision new users. but I can't back up your email, Paul, and take it with me. That's a right I don't have. That's privilege management. And everything from what you can do at the Linux command prompt as root, all the way to what you can do in these SaaS apps is all stuff that needs to be restricted. The more you lock it down, actually the better signal you get to your SIMs and your intrusion detection systems. If I'm not supposed to back up your email and take it with me, the day that I try to do that and I get a log sent out, that's a great way to go find that. And same thing on the network. If we lock down these applications, Paul, you and I might have access to the same application on the network, but if I'm the only one with an account, you shouldn't even be able to get to that. So to me, these zero trust solutions, and I think you've had Kryptonite on, but there's Illumio, there's Cisco's TrustX. This is a great way to lock down that, but it's two sides of that same problem.
Yeah, there's just so much activity in this space, and you've kind of shed some light on the various capabilities, right? And I feel like there's a lot of different subcategories in identity and access management in general. And certainly future shows will be dedicated to dissecting this space, because there's always so much going on, always announcements, always tons of these vendors at every single show that I've attended this year, certainly. And a lot of them are trying to compete with the bigger players like CyberArk. And, I think we need to offer advice for people on if they're navigating the space, because it's just continued to permeate into something that I think before was more about a governance thing. I think it's more of an IT security issue today than ever before.
And the opposite of privileged account management is detecting when people are doing things they shouldn't be doing, and that's a form of intrusion detection.
Absolutely.
And so I'm a big fan of these solutions, but they're expensive and they take a team, and you need to have a policy to put these things in place. But once you do that, it's another form of detection and prevention in the NIST cybersecurity framework. So it's something that we have to do.
So, Ron, are you speaking at any events or attending any events coming up?
Yeah. So after RSA, we did the Hack New York City conference, which was the first time they did that. They did it at the Microsoft Technology Center right there in Times Square, and that was really good. Dave Kennedy spoke. Sunil from Bank of America spoke. I got to speak on a panel, which was really well attended. A lot of nice people. And again, I was in New York City again just this past week at the I'm gonna flub it, but it was the Cyber Investing Summit. So Dave DeWalt, former FireEye CEO, did the keynote there. I was on a couple panels. It was it's a different thing. Getting a bunch of investors together to talk about cyber is a completely different conversation than to get a bunch of users or vendors talking about cyber. So I feel like I got all the different views, with RSA being kind of users and marketing, to all the way to the investors. So it's fun stuff.
Awesome. Ron, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly today. And with that, that'll conclude the show. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. See you next time.